know, some little boys like to play with dolls, and some little girls like to play with trucks, and, well, there's all kinds of variations in between. Achieving a world which is gender neutral or gender accepting is one of the goals of the organization Gender Spectrum. And with us tonight is one of its leaders. Thank you so much for being with us, Joel Baum.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So tell us, Gender Spectrum, what is its goal and how long have you been doing it?
Yeah, so Gender Spectrum is a nonprofit organization, and our mission in the world is to create gender-inclusive spaces for all children and teens. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We do it through trainings with schools and other organizations. We do direct support to families and young people. We have an annual conference, which is coming up this summer and brings together people literally from all over the world to talk about gender. And then the last thing is sort of a larger conversation, much of what you were referring to about what is gender and how is it impacting us in different ways. And Gender Spectrum next year will be celebrating its 10th year.
Wow. You know, I remember when I was a little boy in Richmond, Virginia, sitting on Santa Claus's lap, which is what you did in those days if you were a good old Catholic boy. And of course, the whole reason was you'd sit on Santa's lap and speak into a microphone what you wanted for Christmas so your parents could hear and then buy you that gift. So Santa Claus said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And I said, "I want a Raggedy Ann doll." And he said, "Oh, you must mean a Raggedy Andy doll, because you're a boy." And I guess I was feisty even then at 5 years old. I said, "No, I want a Raggedy Ann doll." Well, to my mother's credit, she bought me a Raggedy Ann doll.
Very good.
I don't know if all parents are like that.
Yeah, I think we definitely live in a society that has some pretty rigid rules about what are boy things and what are girl things. One of our goals is to help kids and families recognize that toys are just toys, and hair is just hair, and colors are just colors, and activities are just activities. That really there's nothing inherently boy or girl about virtually anything, even so much as bodies. But for the most part, we are very comfortable in our society working from this very binary place. And our organization, Gender Spectrum, presents a spectrum.
Well, I mean, it's what is it, the Kinsey scale, supposedly from 1 to 6, with 1 being all straight and 6 being all 6. But most people fall somewhere
in the middle.
And is that the same for the gender spectrum?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about gender, we talk about it in 3 dimensions. We talk about gender biology, which is, of course, the physical body, but there's also gender expression and gender identity. And it's those 3 together and their interaction that leads to our authentic gender. Many people are all on one side, and they're referred to as being cisgender, which literally means the root cis means to be all on one side. But many of us might be somewhere else on gender expression, and our identity might be not completely 100% masculine.
So there might be someone who's biologically, quote unquote, one gender, and expressive, one gender, but then their identity is another gender.
May very well be. And even with identity, it's a spectrum. Some people feel like they're boys, some feel like girls. Some will tell you they feel like both. Some will say neither. Some will say, I'm agender, or I'm fluid and my gender moves between. There's very many different varieties of gender identity, and in societies all over the world, we see this.
Yeah. In San Francisco, it seems like there is a group, an affinity, a media for everything. And even myself, in the last 30 years, I've learned so much about gender identity. I would have thought, oh, well, this is a new thing, but these issues are not new. Gender identity, it's been around for as long as humanity.
For as long as humanity, exactly, across all lines of race and language and class. There have been gender expansive people from the dawn of time, including transgender people. But we also need to remember, this is about every child. Every one of the children that in our society are impacted by gender. Sometimes people want to talk about gender diverse kids, and we instead want to talk about the gender diversity of every kid.
Right. Now, is Gender Spectrum aimed at the kids or the parents?
So our work is about creating conditions that are gender inclusive. And so that means work with adults through parents, certainly, and educators and others working with kids, but it's also working directly with kids. Quite frankly, all the heavy lifting is with the grown-ups. The fact of the matter is, when kids hear about each other's gender and hear about this notion of gender across these different dimensions, they get it intuitively. It's the adults who are often most concerned about, we're going to confuse the kids by letting them them know there's lots of ways to be a boy.
Right. So what's the standard program, or is there one for gender spectrum?
You know, we really work to tailor our programs to the client, but certainly our work begins almost always with a foundational understanding of gender, just some gender basics, helping people recognize the difference between sex and gender, between gender and sexual orientation, the notions of gender identity and gender expression. And for a lot of people, they've never had to think about any of this. They've just assumed that, oh, I'm a boy, I was born this way, and that's how all boys are. Well, it turns out not all.
What is the percentage of the population overall that is quote-unquote gender diverse, or maybe that's not the correct phrase?
There's a lot of phrases that you're always going to get it right and wrong because there's so many.
Oh, good. That's encouraging for someone in my business.
We choose to use the term gender expansive to refer to young people that are really expanding notions of gender. In terms of those numbers, it's really hard to capture. If you think about transgender individuals who perhaps have modified their bodies, that's one way to count, whether it's through surgery or medicines, and that's a little bit easier to count. But many people would say a tomboy is gender expansive, or yourself wanting the Raggedy Ann, and to get a count of that is much more difficult.
Now, you operate Gender Spectrum, which is a national organization, correct? But out of the East Bay.
Correct.
In Oakland, California, correct?
We're in Emeryville, yeah.
Emeryville. The notorious case of a few years ago, the murder of Gwen Araujo, what did that do to organizations such as Gender Spectrum, to the movement, and to you specifically? I mean, I'm sure you remember that day. I mean, what was the impact of that case on the issues which Gender Spectrum deals with?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Gwen's case was incredibly tragic, and unfortunately is one of, you know, dozens and dozens we have every year in this country. But because of the high-profile nature of it, I think it did raise the profile of gender expansive people, transgender people in Gwen's case, to a level that maybe hadn't been seen before. Right. Gwen, I think, also happened to be an incredibly charismatic person, and her mom, in the aftermath of that, became a real advocate and champion. And so I think it was one of those moments that sort of ratcheted up the visibility of this issue. But let me just say, if I could, while her case is a tragedy, there's no doubt, what we believe is there's little tragedies happening every day when a kid is given a message that there's something wrong with them simply because of what they like or what they're drawn to.
And who gives them these messages? Is it always the parents, or do we still have schools and school districts that are giving messages of, well, no, you're a boy, you need to do this, and you're a girl, you need to do that, or you don't need to do any of that?
Well, we certainly have various institutions that are pretty well built around these binaries and that struggle with kids that maybe push on them. In many ways, though, I like to talk about gender. It's almost like the water that a fish is swimming in. It is so predominant, the binary models of gender, and then they're reinforced by much of the media culture that is telling boys how to be boys and girls how to be girls, that it happens from a lot of directions. Unfortunately, we do still have teachers saying to kids, you must line up as boy or girl, or that the boys have to wear this for the dance and the girls have to wear this, instead of saying these are the two options, wear whatever you want. But it's getting better. It is getting better as we realize that not everyone has to fit in one box or the other.
Right. Now, how did you come to this work, and why?
Yeah, I have been an educator all my life. I'm just a little old teacher. I was a middle school teacher and principal for many years. And I've always been focused on issues of social justice. I came to meet Stephanie Brill, who's the founding director of Gender Spectrum. And she and I had a really good, we were very simpatico, and she was building the organization and asked me to join as the director of education. There's also young people in my own life who are gender expansive, and it just felt like a really good fit. And here I am more than 6 years later, just really enjoying it. Feels like a great, great fit.
You know, they say the best way to learn is to teach. What have you learned by teaching this work?
Oh my, yeah, great question. I mean, I am a pretty typical guy, and I have really come to understand that there is no such thing as a typical guy. You know, I thought I was, but what I've come to appreciate is how courageous our young people are when it comes to insisting on being themselves, and how difficult it can be for them to do that, and yet how courageous they and often their families are in supporting them.
One side, the other side. Worst case that you remember of your last few years working with the Gender Spectrum, a case or an instance or a family that you thought, I don't know what to do with them. And then on the other side, a great success story.
Sure. You know, the difficult cases are hard to characterize. One of our principles is to meet people where they are. And we firmly believe that many people come to their, what I would say, biases around a person's gender quite honestly. I think also some of the families that might be perceived to be rejecting in their behaviors are in fact coming from incredibly loving and protective places. But it's certainly...
Meaning they're saying, don't do that, because I don't want you to go out there and be teased.
Exactly. Or in this community, I know what happens to kids who look like that or talk like this. You know, they're very, very scared. I think what's unfortunate in those cases is they don't realize that the most important thing those kids need is their support, and that with that they can weather a lot out there. But certainly the tragic cases for me are when we have kids that are just so clearly telling their parents who they are and just being told, you're not. It's just really painful to see them kind of shut down. Certainly some of the more positive situations have been kids that have transitioned gender, that have identified as a female, even though they were assigned the gender of a male, and gone through their schools and had a very positive experience. And then just the number of adults that we've had come to us and say, you know, I never realized how complex this is, and now I see it. And I tell you, every time that happens, it's pretty wonderful.
In our last few moments, some advice to a parent out there who is raising a gender expansive child.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say follow your kid's lead. It's okay to let them be who they are. They're not going to go anywhere they shouldn't if they're given the space. Your love, your support is going to make all the difference for them to really authentically be themselves. And, you know, I was saying earlier, how many wonderful dancers or surgeons or generals or whatever it might be have we lost in our society simply because we told someone, you can't do that because you're this gender. Let your kids be who they are, and they'll blow you away.
Thanks so much. We've
Thank
been
you.
speaking with Joel Baum of Gender Spectrum. Next